What's up, you guys? I'm Carly Porter, and you're watching Honest Quilting. In this episode, I am so excited to show you an amazing quilt top designed by an amazing designer named Steph Skardal. Steph uses generative art to create her custom printed quilt tops. This means that instead of using a graphics program, she actually writes code on the computer that generates her designs. The quilt I want to show you today is called Rainbow Wheel. And before we dive into the quilting, let's talk to Steph and see exactly how this design came about. Hi, Steph. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. Nice to talk to you.
You too. You're like one of my dream team designers, so I'm excited that we get to chat about your amazing design work because it blows my mind still.
Thank you. Thank you.
So to explain a little bit about what you do, it's called generative art, right?
Generative art is generating it automatically via some computer code or some set of rules. So I'll define some set of rules and there will be data and I kind of tell the code. Some parts of it are randomized, but I kind of give it a set of rules in code format, and then it gives you some random or less random generation.
Okay. So you are a coder and also a quilter. So which came first, coding or quilting?
Definitely coding came first. I've been working as a software engineer for about 12 years, and I've been quilting for about 4 years. Or maybe 5 years. And so I kind of have layered in coding into my recent quilt design, wanting to figure out interesting ways to come up with designs. And generative art is one of those directions I've gone.
Nice. So when you started quilting, did you have code in mind from the beginning, or were you coding and then quilting and then you were like, wait, I can put these two together?
I definitely didn't have them in mind. I did and still do a lot of my designs in Photoshop, and sometimes there's situations where I think, oh, I could do this much faster in code just because that's a tool I'm comfortable, it's a language I'm comfortable using, and then having something randomly generate a bunch of shapes in some type of layout. So I still do use Photoshop for some things, but there's just different scenarios where I think, oh, having this random element coming from code would be really awesome.
Cool. It blows my mind. Like, I feel like you're probably so tired of me telling you how much my head explodes when I see your art. So I want to talk specifically about Color Wheel, the design that we had printed onto fabric. Now, was that, like, how far in your generative art journey was Color Wheel? Is that one of the first ones that started getting you into generative art, or have you been doing this a lot and that was just the one that blew my mind?
I've been doing it for a little while, for a year or so, and getting more complex. And yeah, I think that's the one that it caught your eye, and you thought it was suitable for printing, which is great. And I've been doing it for a while and kind of getting more complex ideas throughout the year.
Right. So with Color Wheel, how did you decide which colors to include? Because there's like thousands, hundreds of thousands of colors. How did you decide which ones to include in that Color Wheel composition?
So I picked a bunch of manufacturers of solids available to us as quilters and makers. And, I work a lot with Kona or Michael Miller solids. And so I picked a lot. I kind of did research on which ones were the most popular and or which ones would be available to me to get their swatch and figure out a color that represented them. So, it was sort of what was the easiest available to me and what I know to be used by a lot of quilters.
Awesome. So when you created that design, did you ever even contemplate actually piecing it? Or did you always know that this is a design that would never get pieced? Because I know that you are crazy and piece crazy designs that I would never think could be pieced. But did you have piecing in mind with that design?
No, I created that more as a web tool or a reference for us to kind of look at how colors compare. So the inner part of the color wheel are highest saturation, and then it decreases in saturation going out. And so I kind of created it as a reference tool, and I think you're the one that saw the vision because you were working on Honest Fabric of like, oh, I really want to print this. And I just thought, yeah, that's a great idea. Yes, those would be pretty small pieces. Some of them are really small pieces. I don't know if I sort of draw the line at like finishing at 1/4 inch strips.
Yeah, you know, when I quilted it, I have to admit there were some, I would say probably the smallest strip was barely 1/4 inch. So it was a little bit nuts.
Yeah. So, I mean, you could paper piece that, but I am a kind of a traditional piecer and I like to press my seams open. So that's not really a design that I would love to do. There's some other ones where I filter it down to independent manufacturers, like the Art Gallery Solids Color Wheel. I think that one would be one that I'd be more likely to piece. Cool. And it would be easier to get a set of solids just from one manufacturer.
Right. Awesome. Okay, well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about your mind-blowing brain. Like, the way your brain works blows my mind. So if people want to check out more about you, where can they find you?
Yeah, I'm pretty active on Instagram at stephskardal.com. Steph Skardal is my Instagram handle, and stephskardalquilts.com is my website.
Okay.
And yeah, I'm pretty active on Instagram. That's probably the best way to reach me.
Okay, perfect. And if you guys love this quilt top, you can get it at Honest Fabric. And she also has a few other generative art fabric designs. So go check those out. All right, Steph, I'm going to get to quilting. So thanks so much for chatting, and I will talk to you later.
All right, bye-bye.
Well, there you have it. How crazy is that to use technology to create art, to create quilts? That like still just blows my mind. We always think of quilts as being a very traditional form of art, a very old school style of artwork. But to be able to take code and software and computers to actually make the design for a quilt is so awesome. Not only that, 50 years ago, we didn't have large format printers. So the fact that we can design something on the computer and print it out onto a piece of fabric the size of a quilt is just mind-blowing to me. When I first quilted this design, I knew that I was gonna have to do some stitch in the ditch work. So I outlined all of the colors with monofilament thread using a straight edge ruler. I wanted it to look like it might have been pieced without actually having to piece it. In the white background area, I did want to add texture, but not really any color. So I used a super subtle off-white thread for all of the background quilting. I wanted to follow the aesthetic of the design coming from the center and working outward, so I decided to have my background quilting kind of flow from the center going outward as well. In the very center of the quilt, I decided to leave an unquilted circle because I felt like this would give it the perfect focus to keep the viewer's eyes in the center of the quilt. For the batting, I used a layer of Warm and Plush from the Warm Company. And for the backing, I used this beautiful soft brown Moda solid fabric from their French General line. I actually bought like the entire bolt of this fabric like 5 years ago because I just loved it so much and I knew it would be perfect for backings. And where this quilt is so colorful and kind of bright on the front, I thought that having a subtle backing would just complement it nicely. I also used that brown fabric for the binding as well to give it a nice dark frame, again without detracting from any of the color of the printed fabric. So now that we know where the design came from, let's actually talk about how to quilt it. Okay, so now that we know what the design looks like that we're gonna quilt, one thing that I really like to do before I actually start quilting is pull up the design on my iPad, and that way I can do some sketching with all the free motion filler designs without actually stitching them out, because I don't like using my seam ripper. And so if I can do all of my mess ups on paper or on my iPad, then that way when I go to my quilting machine, I have the exact plan and I know exactly how I'm gonna quilt my fabric. So I wanna show you how to get the design onto your iPad, or even you can just take the design and print it out and use a pen and paper to do your drawing. But to get it onto your iPad, let me show you what to do. The first thing that we're gonna do is go to honestfabric.com. And then we're gonna search for the design. So the one that we're doing today is called Rainbow Wheel. Okay, so here's Rainbow Wheel. I'm going to click on it. And now you can see there's a few different colorways. The colorway that I have is this white one. So what I'm going to do is take a screenshot. And now I have that design saved to the camera roll of my iPad. Now I'm going to go to Procreate and add a new design. And then I'm going to insert my photo. Okay, so now I have my design on my iPad. And now I can do my markings and see how I want to quilt it again before I ever do any quilting. So with this quilt, I'll show you how I quilted it. Like I said, I did a ton of stitch in the ditch work. So what that means is that between every single color, I used my straight edge ruler to get a perfect, straight, crisp line. And what I did was just went as in a serpentine between each of the colors. So you'll see that when I do that, every other color is unstitched. So after you've done all of the colors around the entire circle, the next thing that you're going to do is stitch along that inner circle line. And you'll do the same thing with each row. So you will have some double stitching, but not a ton. Okay? Now, for the inside circle of the design, what I did was about a 1/2 inch echo inside, and I didn't use a ruler for this. I just eyeballed it. Like so. So this would be stitched down as well. Like that. So because I'm using a sit-down quilting machine, the most logical thing to do while I'm quilting is to start in the center of my design and work my way outward. So let me show you how I quilted in the center and worked my way outward. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is find the very center of your color wheel's inner circle. You can do this by measuring, or if you're like me and you're lazy, you can eyeball it and just hope that your eyeballs are straight and find the center of the circle. Okay, and after I had the center of the circle, the next thing that I did was made about a 3-inch diameter circle around that center. And then again, I also did a 1/2 inch echo around that. So this inner circle is going to stay completely unquilted. Now, for my contour lines that are kind of flowy, I wanted them to flow outward from the center of the circle, kind of almost in a spiral, but just a subtle spiral. So what we're going to do that is we're going to mark top, bottom, right, and left, and then we're also going to make little markings from the top and bottom, right and left of the outside. Now we're going to add some flowy lines, and these are going to be our skeleton so that when we go to fill in, we get that motion that we're looking for. So from the top inside notch, I'm going to do a wavy line to my right side. And then from the right side notch, I'm going to do a wavy line to the bottom. From the bottom notch, I'm going to do a wavy line to the left. And this isn't a super tight wave like this. It's more of just a loose, kind of flowy design. And that's going to give us the skeleton for the center of our design. Now, before we actually do the fill, let me show you in a more simple term how this fill is going to work, because this is all going to be a continuous line. So let's do it from the outside edge of our design so I can show you in a more straight up and down way how you'll quilt it. That way when you're doing it in a circle, it's going to make perfect sense. So on our outside edge, if we have this stitched down as well, and then we're going to do another 1/2 inch echo. We want our contour lines to flow outward. So what we're going to do is just kind of a wavy line. And then when we come back, this is going to set our first skeleton or our first parameter. And this is going to be very organic. There's no rhyme to this design, but there is a little bit of reason. So we're out at the edge of our quilt. We're going to come back in, just kind of doing a wave, but not a perfect echo. So see how it kind of goes in right here and out right here, but then kind of it's a river this way. So that's kind of the idea, is that we want it to be kind of flowy, but not exact flows all the time. We want it to kind of go like that. Okay, so now that we're back down here, there are 3 different fillers that we can fill in each of our parameters or each of our skeletons that we just did. So I'll show you the first one. The first one is called contour lines. And what you do is you're just gonna hop back and forth, tucking your corners in as tight as you can, going up that space. So see how I'm just doing this arc shape? You don't want it to be too straight across like this, but you also don't want it to be too long and skinny like this. Okay, you want it to just kind of fill in as the space gets bigger and smaller. And the point is to tuck in those little tiny points on the side as far as you can. And this is going to give the design kind of a 3-dimensional look, almost like a worm or like a burrow. I really love it because I feel like it just gives the quilt some 3-dimensional look to it. Okay, so once you've filled in that whole parameter, we are going to use this edge that we just created to be the parameter of one side for the next section that we fill. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna come in again and do another wave. And then we're gonna do the same thing. So like I said, there are 3 different fillers. And what I like to do is for the really long, skinny ones, I like to do the contour lines. But there may be spaces where you're not gonna have a full row to fill in, and this is where the other 2 fillers come in. So for instance, if I do those contour lines again, going up, there might be a space where I have some extra space to fill in. Okay, and so what I can do is, let's say I want to put something right here to fill in that space a little bit. What I can do is, while I'm doing those contour lines, I can take a little break and do something like this. And then here are the 2 fillers. So the first one is super simple. It's basically just doing some repeats where we might just come back in and down and up. Okay. And then we can go keep doing our contour lines up. And then let's say I want to do a filler right here to fill in that space. So what I'm going to do is take a little break, make a little space, and then here's the other filler. So this is pretty simple. What it is doing pebbles in a line. Okay, so what that looks like, as I come up, I'm just going to loop, loop, and I'm just doing almost like a crazy 8 design, doing pebbles in that space, and then it puts me right back in the position where I can keep doing my contours all the way up. So as you start to fill in that area, you can use those 3 different fillers and it's going to add a ton of dimension. It looks so awesome. Like it just, I feel like it gives this beautiful organic kind of fill that is kind of a no-brainer. So, alrighty, well, we know how we're going to quilt our quilt top, so let's actually get to the quilting machine and get this thing quilted. Okay, you guys, right before we do some quilting, let's do some marking so that when we get to our quilting machine, it's going to be super easy to do the quilting. So I have my quilt all laid out and ready to go, and I have some marking tools, so let's just get these marks on here and then we will be good to go. Okay, so when I did the drawing, I talked about marking right in the center, so I have some tools. So this is my perfect circle tool. It's Scotch tape because I'm cheap. Anyways, okay, so I have a ruler, and we could get all like scientific-y and mark the exact centers, but that sounds like, I don't know, what if it's off and then I'd mark the wrong thing? So part of me is like, maybe I'll just eyeball it, but let's try with the ruler and see how good it turns out. So, okay, this looks like the center. So, okay, I lied. We're really gonna eyeball it. So I did a little mark, and let's double check this way and see how close to the center we are. Okay, that looks good to me. Okay, so there's my center mark. Now I'm gonna just center my masking tape right in the middle, and I'm gonna draw inside that line to get my inside mark. Okay, not perfect, but that's fine. It's gonna wash away. Okay, and then the next thing that we did was our little 1/2 inch echo, right? So I'm just gonna eyeball a 1/2 inch echo. Okay, now we're gonna do our 1/2 inch echo around the sides, which we're gonna quilt this. So all we really need is the top, bottom, left and right 1/2 inch mark. So I'm gonna mark those. Okay, and now we're gonna do our little notches like we talked about. So top, bottom, right and left, or left and right if you're opposite of me. And then same here. We're gonna do our little notches on the bottom and top, and left and right. Okay, so now we'll do our wavy lines from the top to the right, right to the bottom, bottom to the left, left to the top. So kind of like this. Okay, so I think that's all the marking we need to do. All the rest is going to come from quilting. I have my straight edge ruler here, which used to be a right angle ruler until my husband stepped on it, but in his defense, it was left on the floor way more times than it needed to be left on the floor. So it's my straight edge ruler, so this is what I'm going to use to stitch in the ditch in all of my colors. So as I'm quilting, I'm just going to line up with each of those colors and stitch, doing that zigzag pattern like we talked about. And then I'm going to start in the center, working my way out. For the center color, I have that white thread, kind of off-white thread. And then in the colors, we're going to use our monofilament clear thread. So, okay, let's get quilting! Woo! So this is what happens when you give your toddler M&Ms and then you let him run around the studio while your quilt is draped over its frame. So don't worry, it's not blood, it's not anything crazy. It'll wash out when I wash the quilt. But don't think that I'm using gross bloody fabric because it's just M&M dye. All right, so I have prepped my quilt top with quilt basting spray. And this is really awesome. You'll be able to watch in a separate video how to prep your quilt top for sit-down machine quilting. But you can see that the fabric is nice and basically glued down. So all of my layers stay together really nicely. So this will make it really easy when we're quilting. The other thing that I really like to do when I'm quilting on a sit-down, if I'm working in the middle of my quilt, I don't want to risk quilting over a gather. So what I do is I always fold my quilt top upward, like so. Okay, that way when I'm quilting, I know that I'm not going to stitch over the back of my quilt double. Now I'm going to start with my very center circle in the center, quilting that down. The more of your quilt you can get onto the table, the easier it's going to be to move everything around. I always like to stop my machine in the needle down position. That way, if my quilt is not perfectly on top of my table, it's not going to move at all. That needle is going to anchor it down so that I can cut my threads or whatever else I need to do. It's also really nice to stop in needle down so that if I have to pivot my entire quilt, I don't lose the point where I left off quilting. Okay, so I have my two center circles stitched down. So now let's actually do the filler that we talked about. So I actually ended kind of conveniently on the left-hand side, going up to the top. So let's get up there and then let's do the 1/2 inch stitch around the outside edge of our circle. Let's do a stitch all the way around the circle with our 1/2 inch echo right inside. Okay, don't feel like you have to do this all in one fluid motion. Okay, now I am back to my beginning line, and now it's time to do that filler. So you can start to see how it all blends together, right? So those contour lines were the first shape that I set up. And then as I was quilting, I added this. So I would quilt to about here with the contour lines, and then add the skeleton for my pebbles and do my pebbles, and then be able to come back and keep going till I got to the edge. Now you'll notice that the shape that I'm filling, so this was my original marking line, so I got pretty close, doesn't have to be perfect, but then my second one goes all the way over here. So I have this triangle kind of space to fill. So what that means is probably about right here, I'm gonna start adding some more flowy lines, and some of the motifs will only fit in this area. From about here to here, all of the designs that come out of this line are never going to make it to the point. They're going to make it to about right here. So not too bad, right? See how it's kind of skinny up here and then it gets wider and wider? That's the purpose, because each one of these is going to start skinny and get wider and wider. So same with this section and with this section. And the idea is that by the time we're done quilting this center section, it's going to look kind of spiraled, but nothing too drastic. It's just going to be enough of a spiral that when we quilt the edges of our quilt, it's going to look like those designs are flowing organically behind the color wheel. So now that we kind of understand this middle part, let's go ahead and move to the color wheel itself, and I'll show you how I do the ruler work. So for the colors, I'm using this monofilament thread. This is Sulky's monofilament. It works really great, so that's what I'm going to use. And I'm going to reposition, rethread my needle, and then we'll see what it's like stitching in the ditch using my broken right angle, now straight edge ruler with this monofilament thread. For the bobbin, I'm going to stick with this white thread, which is what I used in the top. So for all of the white area, I'm using 1071 Sulky's 40 weight rayon, and the same thing in the bobbin. So the bobbin will be the same all the time. In fact, before I started quilting, I wound like 3 bobbins so that I would just have enough as I was quilting. So I've changed my thread, and since I'm just right here in the red section, let's just start right here. So the first thing I'm going to do is pull up my bobbin thread right between 2 colors. So I've got my bobbin thread pulled up. Okay, and I'm going to do a couple tie-off stitches. I'm going to take my straight ruler and put it right up against my hopping foot, and that's going to be my guide as I do these straight lines between each color. Okay, let's cut this thread, get that out of the way. Okay, now remember, I'm just going to go down and across, down and across, down and across between each of these lines. Okay, so you can start to see this really pretty texture forming. Let's take a look at the back of the quilt. So check that out. That looks really, really nice. I'm really liking this backing fabric. It's nice and soft, and you can see this awesome, awesome texture taking form. Well, there you have it, you guys. Now it's just time to spend a few more hours to finish quilting this, and I'm excited. I think it's gonna turn out awesome. If you want to pick up this fabric, go grab it at honestfabric.com. Like I said, it comes in 3 different colorways, where there's a white, black, or a teal, which is really pretty. And you can also get it in 3 different sizes. So this is the smallest one. You can get it in a medium, which is like 68 by 80 inches, or king size, which is 88 by 104. So that's awesome. Go pick it up and support Steph, the amazing computer literate genius designer who made this design for all of us to be able to use. Go show your love to her and pick up a panel. All right, until next time, happy quilting and honest quilting.